Uh, Mohan Guruswamy is very well known as a public intellectual. He writes extensively, and it is really a matter of pleasure for the Institute to host you for a talk, and you have chosen the delightfully provocative title, China's Economy is the Party Over? Mohan is chairman and founder of Center for Policy Alternatives, which is a privately funded think tank. He is also a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. He has written a number of books, including one on China, which talks about the title of which was Chasing the Dragon, Will India Catch Up with China? A short one-word answer to that would probably be unlikely. He's a Harvard graduate, but that is among the least of his accomplishments. So we look forward to a stimulating talk, which will undoubtedly be provocative and which will lead us to rethink a number of issues afresh. Thank you very much, Mohan. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Alka, for inviting me. And thank you for the nice, delightful introduction. I've been called a public intellectual for the first time, So I was thinking of public intellectuals in terms of public conveniences also. The book which doesn't get mentioned, which I'm personally very proud of, very happy about, is the book on the Indo-China border dispute. And it was originally called the Indo-Tibet border problem with China. And the people who were funding the study, which was the Observer Research Foundation, Ambassador Dasgotra, said, no, you can't have, this is too provocative, you can't have Indo-Tibet border, it has to be Indo-China. And therefore it became quite tame. But in that book I had done extensive research on our claims. And I found that some of the claims were pretty dubious. But I must say the MEA bought up almost a few hundred copies. I don't know what they did because I don't know anybody in the Foreign Service who's read it, but in the military circles, it's there in all the colleges, so they seem to have read it there. But I particularly like that book because it deals with the border issues and how sometimes we get caught up in our own lives and we continue with this. This cartoon here is a snapshot of the world economic situation right now. China is the cool who's pulling that cart of Western democracies, and they are holding IOUs to China in front. And the Chinese keep collecting these IOUs, and the West keeps printing these IOUs, which are dollar bills, and the Chinese keep pulling the cart forward, which is pretty much sums up the situation right now. Because China holds today $3.5 trillion as reserves, and if they run those reserves down, there will be a run in the Chinese, there will be hyperinflation in China, because they will take it back to China, and there's nobody else who can swallow that much money. The Chinese are, so in effect, financing the Americans. And a famous American economist described that relationship as between a drug addict and a drug peddler. So the addict needs the drug, and the peddler needs to keep selling. So at some stage they get into IOUs. So they're all in this IOU mode. And they're ruining the world economy in the process. Between these two countries, posted huge trade deficits, huge deficit financing, and the world economy gets rocked because of these two giant economies. This is the drift of the world economy is how we were. And even till 1800, 1740 or 1750, we were among the two big economies, China and India. And in 1820, that was the time the British had just begun nibbling into Punjab. And in 6 years' time, they were going to take Punjab. India was at its peak as an economy, and then it started coming down. And this is closer to the last few years, where you see after reaching the bottom in 1950, both China and India started moving upwards. And China today accounts for about 15% of world GDP, or a little more than that, and India is about 8.5%. And this is the future transition of the economies, as you will see here. China becomes number 1 in 2050, India is number 2, and pretty big economies. This is Western projections, $59 trillion for China, $43 trillion for India. This is not as unimaginable as more people think. Because I always say that when I came back to India after my education abroad, the GDP of India was less than the turnover of General Motors. And when Dr. Manmohan Singh began his reforms, the first round of reforms I showed in 91, India was about 180 billion.
Not Narasimha Rao.
Narasimha Rao, difference. 1908, but Narasimha Rao never wanted to own up the reform as his, He always said, no, Dr. Manmohan Singh. But today we are a little over 2.2 trillion. And so, you keep doubling every 6 years, 7 years. You look at the numbers, it will come up. It's quite startling. So the enigma of arrival is there, but we're going to arrive. And so China has already arrived, so we're moving in that direction. So what happens between now and the next 30 years is the Chinese have the upper hand. And we have to be very clear that their economy is going to be bigger than ours for at least the next 20 years, at least 3 times bigger than ours. One reason why we've had this startling growth in the world is the expansion of world GDPs. Now we are, in 2010 we were a little over $70 trillion, and in 1960 we were about $8 trillion. So this is the steep climb the world has been witnessing in just economic activity. Why this happened suddenly is different, because the dollar was dealing from the gold standard. So the Americans had great ability to print dollars, and with more dollars they could fund the world. And they lent money everywhere, they borrowed money everywhere, and they purchased goods. So all of us have got hooked to selling to the American market. And they've actually financed the expansion of the global economy, which has been very good for most of us. But where do we get off this tiger is the big problem. When you get off the tiger, you're going to get a massive depression. Well, that's another issue now. But what has been happening, in the last few years, this big growth has been slowing down. As you can see in this end of the chart, the growth has been slowing down. World GDP growth now is down to about 2.6%. It was almost touching 5 or 5.5 in most of the 2010s, in the 1990s. Now it is down to 2.4. And this is not going to rise much higher. The World Bank forecast 2.9 in 2016, but now they're backing off. Today they have said that this is not going to be 2.9. It will be very good if we do 2.3. So this is one big reason why I say the party is ending. The huge growth which we saw is now coming to an end, and it's not going to grow like this again. And I'll show you the reasons why it's not going to grow. But in this meantime, what has happened is that China has become the biggest contributor to world GDP growth. It contributed 21%, European Union 12%, United States 12%, India almost 9% of world GDP growth. And this role is being reversed. India is now expected to contribute 15% of world GDP growth in the coming decade. The next 10 years, India is going to contribute 15% of it. That's what the IMF and the World Bank are saying. If you ask anybody in Delhi, they don't know about it. We just move along the flow, and so we're going to do it. It looks like we're going to do it. So China's growth, India's growth, the world is depending on our growth to grow. After all, somebody has to consume. And why is this consumption taking place? Because there is great expansion of middle class. As you can see in the two charts here, the middle class, which is represented in the orange and red, is just going to expand. And India is going to see an expansion of 180 million families are going to join the middle class from now to 2050. 180 million families means 900 million people. 900 million people going to join the middle class. Imagine the amount of motorbikes, scooters, cars, houses, all these things you need. Fans, copper, steel, iron, all. So this kind of growth which China had in the last 30 years, India is expected to have it. I once was in the Chinese Economic Society, and Chinese economists told me that, we are like the elder brothers. You are following us, you are 25 years behind. But you will also go along the same path. So he says, look, it's like, two brothers in a family. One brother, the older brother, he moves up faster. And he says, now the older brother's reached a certain maturity, he's got a Mercedes Benz. And you are now buying yourself a motorbike and you're going to rise up. And you will also get to the Mercedes Benz stage 25 years, 30 years from now. I think that's fine. But what happens if I get alcoholic? What happens if I get into a gambling habit? So all these things, So it may not be there. So we have running the risk of getting into these habits. And I think we've got some of these bad habits are already there. Deficit financing and, looting of the exchequer and all these things are just going on. Transferring money abroad. We are net exporters of capital. Illicit capital is almost $93 billion a year now. And legal capital is $40 billion. So we're exporting $130 billion. And we get $40 billion FDI and we are jumping around. So I'm very happy about that. So these bad habits are on the way, but prognosis on the top looks okay. Now, this is the slowdown of the world's economy. As you can see, both highly developed, high-income countries and developing countries both have dropped. So the party is slowing down. The pace of the party is slowing down. The number of free lunches are going to come down. It's very clear. This is the World Bank's latest report, which came out in January. Global GDP forecast. As you can see, year after year, we've been missing growth forecasts, global growth forecasts. And and we're very close down to 2.3%, which the World Bank had forecast earlier. Now, the Chinese are interesting people. They have been exporters from the beginning of history. They have been trading with India, they've been trading with the Arab countries. Their porcelain was found in the port of Ceuta, which is in Tunisia, and has gone west. So the word China for porcelain came from China because it was Chinese. And the Chinese are the first people who built an export machine. They standardized the width of the bullock cart track. They standardized the size of the wheel because you had to carry them to ports. They are the first guys who built roads to ports. And so, they had weights and measure systems. All this was geared towards selling goods to other people. In India, we had dozens of weights of measures all over the country. Chinese had one uniform standard. This was because they had become an exporting nation even in the past. And the Chinese trading ships used to come to Cochin, wait for the winds to turn and then go. And that's how the word monsoon came along. कि मौसम बदलता है तो the ships used to go and they used to carry Chinese goods. India was sitting in between on the Indian Ocean collecting taxes. The Zamorin of Cochin used to collect taxes from Chinese ships and Arab ships both because we had to come and halt in Cochin. We're pretty much in that position now. We're sitting in between the Indian Ocean. Got a finger pointing at their jugular, which is their oil lanes. Now, this has been the Chinese position in the last 10 years. If you see, there's been a trade surplus year after year. And this trade surplus adds to your national wealth. Because money stays with you, it stays in banks abroad, you can bring it back for investment. This is accretion. India, by contrast, produces deficits year after year. This is trade surpluses, not current account. Trade surplus. You add current account to it, the Chinese get as much remittances as we do, is even bigger. Now the importance of growth of exports to China's growth is visible in this chart here. The yellow part is what the exports contribute. So a significant part of their growth comes from this export machine. Now the export machine stops or slows down, China gets hit inside. Now in the 2008 slowdown, in 1 month, the Chinese had to shut down factories which are selling goods to America, and they lost 22 million jobs in 1 month. 22 million jobs. People are asked to go home, saying that we have no more work for you. If we were in that position, we could not shut down. We don't even have a law to shut down factories. The parliament is still discussing it now. So the Chinese are dependent on this export machine. This is China's trade with the world. You see how it has been increasing from 266 billion in 2001, exports have gone to 1.6 trillion in 2010. It is now something close to 2 trillion now. Imports have also gone up, and the trade surpluses year after year. There has been a trade balance, global world trade balance. China became the world's largest trading nation in 2013. Bigger than Germany, total trade rose to 4.16 trillion in 2004. In 2014, China has already become the world's largest exporter of goods since 2009. Trade surplus in 2014 was 260 billion trade surplus. And this is the importance of being China. You're number one or number two trading partner with the G20. All of them. Nobody is there who's not doing business with you. Even India, we are second biggest source of imports. And these are China's top trading partners. And you can see the trade balance, 144 billion with EU, 202 billion with the United States, 252 billion with Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a pass-through. So that is the amount of their trade surplus. With everywhere, they don't really care. But India, we are good people, so we also contribute to China's trade balance. Now it's 40 billion a year now, And we're very happy, Our foreign ministry will keep saying, Indo-China bilateral is going up, our trade is going up, but they won't tell you that it's adverse to us. Foreign ministry has a way of looking at more optimistic things of life. It's very good. This is why we all do well. This is the drug addict. Look at his trade surplus and trade deficits year after it just keeps piling. China is, US trade deficit is in the yellow, and ASEAN and China. ASEAN and China are interlinked together. Another mistake we make is we try to disaggregate ASEAN and China. Now, this iPhone, if it is made in China, China gets the blame for the trade deficit. But this phone, the plastic case comes from Malaysia, the glass comes from Taiwan, the IC comes from Taiwan, the keyboard comes from somewhere else. The Chinese only get $7 for assembling this. But the entire trade of this value is fixed to China. So Americans jump on China, say, your trade balance is growing. The Chinese all they do is say, look, this comes from ASEAN. So you please deal with your friends in ASEAN. So your political allies and your military allies teamed up against me. But you talk to them about it. So this is very difficult to unravel. So the party can only slow it down. And will keep slowing down because the more you slow it down, the more you're going to hurt ASEAN. Current account deficit of the United States. This was 2006 was the peak. This is lovely. The whole world loved the current account deficit because current account deficit in America means I'm selling goods to them. And they are not, they are giving you dollars. Obama said that by 2018, the United States is not going to have a current account deficit. Now, if I were a Chinese economist or a strategist, I would think of that as a declaration of war. What he's basically saying is, your days of prosperity at my cost are coming to an end. It's not going to happen anymore. The Americans, Chinese computer.
No, I think it's the UPS.
Indian UPS, okay. Anyway, so this is coming down. This is one big reason why the world is slowing down.
Some wire is pulled down from the UPS.
नीचे से कुछ निकला था when you had
नीचे से कुछ निकला होगा. Check करें.
No, switch it off.
No, you can't switch it off, you connect it in here.
the other end or something.
ये इन्वर्टर की है इन्वर्टर.
Can you all hear me at the back there? So, President Obama, Chinese don't like him very much because he essentially declared war on them by saying that I'm going to get this back into control. And in Clinton's time, if you can notice in 80, current account deficit in the United States had come to zero. President Clinton left a balanced budget and a balanced economy for George Bush. George Bush went through 2 wars, posted $1 trillion deficit by the end of his term. And then, getting out of that is taking time. Now, oil is very important to understand the importance of oil. It contributes almost $40 trillion to the world GDP of $85 trillion. Without oil, there is no world economy. 50%. Because oil, today, there's oil in everything. Even this pen is made of plastics, and that you need hydrocarbons. Everything in life, fertilizer, our plastics and our automobiles, everything has hydrocarbons in it, which is oil derived. So oil producers are the guys who are supposed to have the money. As long as commodity prices are high, they have money. When commodity prices are high, they are buying goods, they are buying services. And then we are happy. We will moan about oil prices, we will scream about it, but it's good for us as we're now discovering that oil prices have come down. We have got hurt because our remittances, which gave us $74 billion last year, this year will come down to 69, next year will come down to 60 or less, and it's going to get lesser and lesser. If the Arabs are starving and tight, we are going to get hit. Our goods we sell will also come down. Many of you may not realize it. Our biggest export market is the United Arab Emirates, because from there it goes to other parts of the world. And that's an Arab area. And $104 billion of our exports, merchandise exports, go through the Arab countries. So when they get impoverished, all of us get impoverished, China, America, everybody. Because that surplus money which comes into the world system is no longer coming in from there. So, while you might be happy to say our oil bill is coming down, but your export bill is also coming down, your remittances bill is also coming down, everything else is coming down, so you get hurt in any way. So when you destabilize the system, you get rocked. Now this is commodity prices. You can see that from 2010, it's been declining, and it's been declining and keeps coming down. Energy prices even sharper. People are predicting that energy prices will pick up again, but they don't seem to be picking up because the Russians saying that, you've got a trade sanction on us, we're going to pump more oil. The Saudis are saying, we are broke, we've got a deficit budget already, so we need more oil, so we need to sell more oil. The Iranians are saying, we've been starving for the last 20 years, we are sanctioned, we need to pick up, so we need to export oil. So there's going to be a glut in the oil market for the next 5-6 years at least, and so, this party is not going to change. When you move up onto a higher plane, that is higher expenditure, higher purchases, you get onto a different cycle. So we have to back cycle on this, which the world is finding it difficult. Now I'll come to the story of our lives. This is the phases of lives we go through. In a pram, then you get a little bicycle, then you get yourself a cycle, then you get, like many of you, get your first car, and then you move along. Then you get your caravan, and then you come to a self-propelled wheelchair, and then you need a nurse. This is the story of economies also. Economies move in this phase. So the central line is, we call it the working age saving cohort. That is when you are 22 or so, thereabout, to the age of 65, you are earning, you are saving, you are spending, you are consuming, you are doing. So as an economist, only this group is of interest to us. The rest we call the dependents. Above 65, Ambassador Rana, myself, some of you gentlemen there, the dependents. No interest of economists. And look at our habits. He is not spending, I am not spending, he is not saving, I am not saving. We've got savings. We don't know what to do with it. And I'm not going to buy a car now. Other day I wanted to buy a car. My Skoda was getting old. And I told my wife the new model has come out, I think I'm going to buy it. She said, how long do you want to use it? You know, because you reach a certain age where, you know, the inevitable is close by. You know? So you don't spend. So this middle line is very interesting. The bottom three, you're not doing anything. You know, you're sponging off your parents. You know, your parents have to spend. And here, you know, you either live on your savings or you hope your children will spend on you. So countries go through this phase. So when you say that your working age cohort is big and the dependency factor is low, that means you are in very good shape economically. Now China transited through this phase 20 years ago and they have come to an end of this phase. The beauty of India is we're just entering this phase. We're just entering into this low dependency ratio era. Of course, you know, the finance minister won't know about these things. He thinks that the economy is growing because of him. And so did Dr. Manmohan Singh and so did that. The economy is growing because of where you are demographically. That's the biggest push for the economy. If you don't have people in this middle bulge, you're not going to grow, come what may. And you see it's happening with China. This is that people at my age, a stockbroker urged me to buy stock that will triple its value every year. I told him at my age, I don't even buy green bananas. So, you know, at our age, we stopped buying it. Now, I come to Japan. I spoke to you about Japan. Whatever the Japanese do, it is not going to save them. The biggest population cohort in Japan are women above the age of 85. That's the biggest population cohort. Binkle Singh's group. So if you're a young man, I say don't go east, look west, because in Japan is nothing for you. You know, there are lots of old people in Japan. And Japan is just not going to grow. So Japan might resort to deficit financing, all kinds of financing. It is not going to grow because people are not consuming. And they've become a very high cost economy. And they have savings. So Prime Minister has done a right thing to go to Japan. Because they have money sitting in the bank. They need to put that money somewhere for someone else to work, and give them remittances, repatriations. So you know, so don't look at Japan. This is what happened to Japan. And this will happen to every country in the world unless your population keeps growing. Now see this aging of the world all over. Japan, Europe, Denmark, US, Asia, world average is rising. Africa is the youthful country, India is the youthful country right now. India's youth also will go. Aaj jawani pe itrane wala, kal tu pachtaega. So in 2055, the party is over for India also. Japan, aging, you can see this, how this trend is moving. 2040, look at the trend. Europe is aging. The number of people that got more at the upper age groups, number of people that got less at the lower age groups is telling me. China's population has stabilized. Zero growth. So when you have zero growth, what does it mean? It means you're getting older. People are living longer. New kids are not being born. So you're getting older. So it's heading for a people's crisis. The People's Republic is having a people's crisis now. Fertility and mortality have both changed. But this is, and the Chinese have now therefore said you can have 2 children. And they've been trying this policy for the last 10 years. You know what happened? They were hoping to get a growth of 94 million. They got 4 million. So people are happy. When you become middle class, you don't want to have children. Because children are old age security. Many of our middle class families, upper middle class families, have 1 or 2 children at the most. It's lower income people who have more children because that is a social security. At least out of 6 kids, 2 guys may turn out to be good and look after you in old age. You know, we don't depend on our children for old age. You know, we drive our Maruti 800s and go around. So 1 in 10 Chinese are now over the age of 65. They're increasing. This is the changing Chinese demography. Completely changes it. Completely changes. So they're running out of domestic markets. They're running out of domestic consumers. They're running out of domestic producers. They're running out of domestic savers. So in any case, the prognosis is not looking good. then the world prognosis is not looking good. So the double whammy is caught them. And Xi Jinping is now accumulating power in his hands, not knowing how to redeem this situation. And what he does with that accumulated power, we don't know. There is the neighbors, so we've got to be very worried and careful. You know. Now, in growth terms, they've missed the replacement level. Replacement level is 2.1, India's is 2.5. What China is 1.4. The Chinese population go to age very rapidly and then start declining. I won't dwell much on this, I'll leave these charts here, you all can have a look later. Next thing is happening is education, higher education is expanding. So workforce is now becoming educated and they don't want to join the labor force. So you're having a severe labor shortage. Labor shortage means wages are going to go up. Wages are going to go up means cost of goods are going to go up. Now, this is, if you look at this, this is very interesting. Of all the big economies, 10 big economies in the world, only China has got industry as the biggest component of GDP. 50% of GDP comes from industry, which means they're all working in factories. We are in that company, you know, we have 28% industrial sector and 55% service sector. Now you become service sector oriented when you reach the level of economic prosperity and growth and industrialization. Then you transfer your labor force into services, that selling hamburgers, bank clerks, ATM machines, you know, all that stuff. So we call that a post-industrial society. You industrialized, then your workforce is moving to post-industrial. So India is in this company. It's very quite magnificent because we're becoming post-industrial without having industrialized. So you can see this, we are now 55% service industry. Very happy. And I tell you why we are 55% service. Now all of you think it's because of IT. IT is only 9%. IT employs 1.4 million people, generates $135 billion of exports. Your biggest component of service is government, public administration. It accounts for 17% of service and is growing happily at 14% a year. Wages. So for some reason, we economists show this as service sector. I don't see government providing any service, but deemed as service sector and growing away happy. Pay commission after pay commission. Secretary to government now gets 2,90,000 rupees. And I look at many secretaries and I look at them, is this guy worth 2,90,000 rupees a month? You know? So this is accounting for 9% of GDP. Government wage bills account for 9% of GDP. And that is where I say, you know, your drinking habit, your gambling habit, your drug habit, you're pandering to that. You can't spend that kind of money if you want to grow. You don't have money for industrialization. You don't have money for infrastructure, but you have money to pay all these guys. Huge salary increases. China has aged 180 million people above the age of 60, and this is going to be 360 million people by 2030. So it's going to be heavily loaded with dependents, old people. The implications of aging is one is the demographic dividend is over. Effect of a popular, favorable population age is over. The economy will slow down irrespective of whatever happens in China. China, we say that the number of adult diapers sold exceeds the number of baby diapers. You know, so that is the situation. So China is, before it got rich, it got walking sticks. So that's what the Chinese say, before we become rich, now we are walking on walking sticks. So they can't drive the world economy anymore on the cheap. People like Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, even India, Bangladesh, we're taking away production goods from them, markets from them. So no more business as usual. That is also coming to an end. But there's another danger here. The tax burden on the working people is going to increase now. to cater to their social welfare system, the tax of the people who are working now has to go up by 150% by 2030. Now the political implications of this, we don't know. Xi Jinping assuming all power, the party assuming all power, it would mean two things. It would mean the end of that party, or because people are going to revolt. People are very unhappy when you ask them to part with money. They are willing to work, 24 hours a day, go to the border, but pay them money. If you don't pay them money, and they've got used to certain money, they will revolt. And already all over China, you see signs of disturbances. The Procurator General last year said 220,000 disturbances in his report. Even the one guy protest is termed a disturbance. But the number of disturbances are increasing. And Xi Jinping assuming all these powers is to be seen in that backdrop also. What does it mean to the party? Hu Jintao was talking about having characteristics of an advanced democracy. That is, I will allow independents to contest in local government, I will do this and that. But this guy is not talking about it. He's talking about party and the bayonet all in the hands of one person. 2007 was the year of inflection for China. That is when the current account surplus started declining. And it was down to 380 billion last year. Now, last year, in February 2015, exports fell 18.1% from the year earlier. Imports rose to 10.1%, yielding a trade deficit of 23 billion for the month versus surplus of $32 billion for the month of January, for February. Now that, to my mind, was the point of inflection, where these ratios are crossing each other. And the Chinese surplus in the United States fell 34% to 9.2 billion for that month. Surplus with EU also dropped. So these things are dropping. Chinese easy money days are also coming to an end there. Now I told you about the iPad. This is the chart which breaks it up. You can see the cost of Chinese labor is only 2% of that cost of iPad. The rest all comes from outside. China is an aggregator of goods and exporter of aggregated goods. China is no longer industry driven. I was thinking of calling this slide China is no longer industrious. Well, they continue to be industrious, but they're no longer industry driven. They're also becoming a service oriented society. So the Chinese economy losing steam. Exports are critical to China's economy, accounting for more than a quarter of the economic activity, compared with a little more than a tenth in the United States. To maintain overall growth rate, China hoped to keep exports growing at about 10% a year. For much of this year, it has succeeded. But the US has declared its intention to close its current account deficit by 2020, 6 years now from now. So you see signs of this. Inventory is piling up. These two lines, that is the goods produced, is stored and the goods being sold, being consumed. And the inventory pile-up is just going on and on. So there are lots of goods piled up in China. Steel is piled up. Manufactured goods are piling up. Everything is piling up. They're trying to dump steel. They dump steel in India. We put barriers in between. The world is putting barriers in between. So they can't even dump. They have to de-size. And that is very painful. China is going to lose 100 million jobs in the next five years. So unless they get productivity up, they're going to be in bad trouble. China is now following Japan's footsteps. They hate Japan, but willy-nilly Japan is showing them their path. They're following that. But in India, no, we get very cheerful. Chinese have difficulty, we all get very happy. But I always tell people, at $10 trillion, if you're growing at 10%, at $10 trillion, if you're growing at 5%, you're adding $500 billion. At $2 trillion, which is India, if you grow at 10%, you're adding only $2 billion, $200 billion. So China's growth will be much bigger than yours. So every time we equate the health of the economy, the amount of money we have with power, Chinese are going to have much more power, much more money than us for some time to come, as old parents do have more money than their working children. So, so we shouldn't get too excited about this. We might make mistakes on this. Next, we did a study at the Defense Services Staff College the other day, where I showed the Chinese military budget till 2050 is going to be 3 times India's. At least 3 times. And they have reorganized the military, they've got more lethality. The entire area looking after India is under one military district now, one Supreme Commander. He's sitting in Langzhou. And we have an Eastern Army Commander, an Eastern Air Force Commander, a Central Army Commander, a Central Air Force Commander, Northern Army Commander, Northern Air Force Commander. So when the Central Air Force Commander or Central Army Commander wants a strike from Central Air Force, doesn't have any planes, from Northern Air Command, Northern Air Command will say, you talk to my chief first. The chief will say, talk to Raksha Mantri first. By the time they think this situation is over, we've seen this happen in Kargil, where the army asked for airstrikes, and the Air Force took 3 days to give the airstrikes. Because they said, Raksha Mantri is not available, you have to talk to him. You can't tell me. So you're facing one command, and you've got 9 commands. And then these commanders are also, Daryl Jacob was once telling me that one of the big reasons why the Air Force moved from Fort William, its command from Barrackport, to Shillong, was because Fort William, the army commander got precedence. So if his car came and his car came, the army car would go first. So he said this guy went out to Shillong. Shillong doesn't have an airfield. The Air Force commander sitting in Shillong. So are we therefore prepared to deal with all this? Is there anybody in government strategizing these things? I don't know, I'm not particularly sure. Maybe Institute of Chinese Studies is telling them something, but they don't seem to be listening to you either. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellent. In a way, what Mohan has said, if I were to sum it up in just 3 words, I would say demography is destiny. I don't think that would be an unfair synopsis of such a vast canvas, large canvas, set of ideas that really would take some time to digest. I think it's very kind that you are leaving this here, and if you agree, we will perhaps put the entire presentation on either on our blog or on one of the other websites of the Institute, so it is available for anybody who wants to see it. We have time for questions and answers. I'm going to revert to my old ways, old dogs can't change, can't learn new tricks. And one of my old tricks is that at least the first 4, maybe 5 questions should come from those who are under 50. So all my senior colleagues and distinguished personalities will kindly hold their horses, and I would urge the people at the back particularly to speak out. The floor is yours. Please. You didn't expect this, but you know me. I mean, I always pull this one out of my act. So somebody at the back. Yes, please.
So basically, you mentioned in the first part of your presentation that this whole world economy is actually looking to be slowing down. Whereas you also mentioned that middle class in several countries, including India, had been growing and they need lots of consumer goods and other things. It doesn't make sense to me that how I should connect these 2 things. Secondly, when you are talking about demography, I saw your data. Generally, suppose you are saying when you have these 2 different tables, one is talking about 2010, another is talking about 2050.
Yeah.
So 2050 means we are talking 40 years, and actually now they have stopped their one-child policy. They have been also going to change their orientation, they are going to make changes, modification. So I think this is the normal pattern, and it doesn't anyway disadvantage for any economy to move from industrial to post-industrial society economy. So if their labor force is becoming, you can say, costly, definitely they can go to service sector. And actually, I 2 weeks back I listened to a presentation in which somebody told that they are moving in value chain. Chinese are. So basically, they are shifting in a different direction, and that necessarily doesn't mean that.
Okay, we'll take at least 3 questions in one lot. So please, let's have some more questions. Yes, please.
Sir, you mentioned about this increase of wages in China and the whole demographic issue and all that. So does it also mean that there is an increase of wages in PLA as well? And is it affecting the quality of soldiers they are getting?
Okay. Anyone else at the back?
Yeah,
Yes, please.
Yeah, so demography was another, I did not know about this dimension before, but I read about the new normal of, China in 2000, there were many articles about the new normal, and now how they want to concentrate on more consumption-led economy and not really on going to. Is it, let's say, a step taken purposefully that they want to, and again, one of the person who had written a blog had said that now there has to be more jobs, high-paid jobs in China. So is it like let's say steps taken consciously, or is it just happening naturally that China is going to be like Japan, or they are doing it purposefully?
A 4th question, anyone from the back? Yes, please.
So how is the slowdown going to impact India?
Okay, I think that's a nice cluster of questions.
Yeah.
The last one is of course the deadliest in a way, but take them in any order you wish.
Now, first question, you seem to say that the middle class expansion in the world doesn't get reconciled. You are making the basic assumption that an Indian middle class is different from an American middle class. Okay? So when you have an expansion of the Indian middle class, you're not going to have the US kind of expansion, middle class coming in. You're going to have an Indian, like we have an Indian middle class now. Who's our middle class? Who's our middle class? Think of that. A person, a lower middle class person is an LDC in government. He's a police constable. So he's got a motorbike, he's got a refrigerator, he's got a house. This is the new middle class now, in economic terms. And these are the people who are going to expand. Not the people, not we people who call ourselves the middle class, but actually the upper class in this country. So, and the upper class in this country is the super class. So the expansion is logically going to take place. So I think understanding of that is a little off on that. The one-child policy has not succeeded. They've announced it 10 years ago. They began loosening it up. And they formally announced it 4 years ago. People are not having children. The number of babies are recorded in hospitals. Because there is no incentive to have more children. Your child is expensive. If you're not going to the state school anymore, all education is now costs money, medical care costs money, everything costs money. It's expensive to raise a child. So people not having children, those are demographic facts. You can't dispute facts. You may not like it, you may not tie in with your thinking, but those are facts. And you can't repudiate facts. Then you had one more question. What was that? The 3 actually rolled in one.
One is basically moving from labor intensive to, let's say, industry to service. It doesn't necessarily mean.
It means export growth is over. You're not going to export hamburgers. Services means that. You're not exporting. That's what I'm saying. IT exports. In India, only one small part is employs very few people. You're talking about employment. And you're talking about export-led growth. That's why the Chinese have, I showed those charts as to why exports have been very important to China's growth. That is not going to be there. So if they are not going to export, and bank clerks are not earning any exports. So that's what you mean when you get into services. Services, and that's what services don't get you much in terms of exports. So that is going to slow down. So I think basic thing is to see how this thing opens up. If you're not going to export, your growth is going to slow down. Your exports have been giving you 2.5% of your growth. You're posting 8-9%. You got 2.5% from exports. So if you're coming down to 6% and you take out 2.5%, you're down to 4.5%. PLA wages, I don't know about that because it's a conscript army. You basically give them noodles and tea and ask them to go and fight. Indian Army is a volunteer army, so your wages have to keep abreast with the market. Or actually, we do better than the market. Market means the minimum wage in the country. But in China, it's a conscript army. You've got to do military service. There's no escape unless you go to university. So wages should not move with market wages. Somehow if you think that the military becomes like our military, wage intensive, is not going to happen. The military is still going to be capital intensive expenditures. And so are they doing this consciously? It's very difficult to move up higher productivity ladders. For higher productivity ladders, you need, not only do you need highly skilled manpower, but you also need high levels of technology. The United States can move up productivity ladder because it's like California driving technology. China and India are Me Too societies. We don't do anything original. We bring work from outside and do it here. There's not one new software written in India or in China which is the world market leader. We're just not in that game of innovation and creativity. We are very good at replicating things. So you're always going to be behind. And when it comes to replication, you've got to compete on wages against the others. It's very difficult to become more productive. So it will be very difficult to move up the ladder unless society as a whole moves up. And to replicate the United States is going to be very difficult. A land with abundant resources. Nature has been very generous to them, very bountiful, given them a good mix of people. When the rest of the world is slowing down, the United States in this demographic game is going to keep increasing till 2050. Why? Because of getting more selective immigration. Now, all our children are going away to America. I call America the land of our children. Because, all our children are going there. Every family, middle class, upper middle class family has got somebody sitting abroad. I come from Hyderabad, where in that one city we have 81,000 H-1B visas. 81,000. The software techies, biotech techies, all sitting there and sending, some of them at least, send aged parents money. Mine don't. So it's an interesting situation that America is going to be, whether we like it or not, the driver of world growth for a long time to come. Now there's a new study which I saw only yesterday. If you use the new methods of calculating GDP, the GDP does not capture everything. It does not capture the value of R&D, the value of this. The Americans are looking at $140 trillion GDP now. If you start adding, because just now we added value addition to our GDP, you start adding these kind of calculations, you're looking at a relative GDP of 140 trillion. Because a lot of things which they do are not computed. In India also, housewife labor is not computed, farmers, milking of the cow is not computed. So you start computing, GDP actually starts changing. But when you change the norms in America, apply more value addition, more value to creativity, then you get different levels of GDP. And they're going to drive the world economy for a long time to come. That is why, our children are brighter than us. They go to America, they don't want to stay here. Engineers, IIT, 97% of Delhi IIT goes to America. Why? You have to ask ourselves this question because that's where the driving is taking place.
Final question, how it impacts on India.
How it impacts on India. There's a nice Dinkar poem, कि Delhi सोई हुई है नर्म रज़ाई ओढ़ी. So we are like that, the whole world is around us is collapsing. In the villages and in the countryside, people are, but people of Delhi have got a nice silk razai and are sleeping in it. So how it's going to hit us, we don't know. One day, I am predicting myself that by 2025 we'll have a major skirmish with China. And we will see 62 all over again. We're not going to be prepared, we're not going to be ready, we're not even going to be intellectually prepared for it. We're all, the military is planning for a war which is last 6 months, 8 months. These things are not going to happen. Second is, they will compete with you for markets, every mile. If oil prices start going up again after 5 years, 6 years, they'll compete with you for less oil. So China as a competitor is not going to go away. And I'll tell you one thing, the Chinese don't like Indians. Much as Alka or Rapai all have been to China, but I gather one thing which is very clear. They don't particularly care for us. They think that we are noisy, we are dissonant, and we are always jumping out of turn. And we are doing that. Last 5 years, what did we spend on? Security Council membership. We are a superpower. Make a Security Council. This is the only country in the world which openly aspires to be a superpower. You arrive at being a superpower when the world says you are a superpower. No. We say, you want to be a superpower. Then what does Hillary Clinton come? As secretary, she said, we'll make you a superpower. Condoleezza Rice says, we'll make you a superpower. So, इसमें you're getting in, that's why Deng Xiaoping said in that period of growth, keep quiet, talk softly. And we are the other way around. Danda niyam or pugarte.
Okay, I think there's time only for one substantive round of questions. Floor is open to anyone. 4 or 5 questions in one go. Yes, sir.
So I wanted to ask Mohan Goswami a very hypothetical question. We may have Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton coming in, and the main theme of their issue is the TPP must be over, and China is figuring into everything. I heard his foreign policy speech, I made nothing out of it. Now, what do you think is going to happen post-November? Because both are heading towards one thing what do you feel, will it have any impact on China?
Alka.
Just 2 quick questions. In the current discourse of the new normal, this Chinese response is that all countries come to a stage when you reach certain levels of GDP, automatically you cannot grow at all stages anymore. So we've now reached that point. So demographics is one part of the story, but also growth cycles which take their own. So how would you respond to that? And question number 2: why do you think that they'll wait till 2025? That gives us more time to prepare. So why should they wait that long?
So my question is again related to demography, as you called it. We're moving from industrial age, agricultural age and industrial age, where demography was actually important in terms of production. Now we're moving into technology, high technology age, or whatever, information technology age, or mobile or smartphone age, where technology is actually demography is becoming more and more redundant. Like Chinese are now producing the biggest number of robots now in the world. So in the coming decades, our call centers which are there now, this smartphone can do anywhere in the world. iPhone can do the same job which the call centers are doing. So they've become redundant in any case. So are we going to require less and less people? So is demography also going to get affected?
Logically, with much of technology you need less people. But you're not going to have less people. You want to cater for people. You're adding 12 million people to your workforce every year. You want to create jobs. If you don't have 12 million people accruing, then you can say I don't have to create jobs. But you have to create jobs. And where do you create jobs? We are not industrialized at all. Factories are where you employ jobs. You take people from the farm sector to less skilled jobs in the factory sector. or in the construction sector, and then they move on from there to higher productive jobs. We've not even done the transition.
For the Chinese, they have less people.
Excuse me, I think let's continue with the question round first, and then we'll, Suresh and over there. These are the last two questions I fear, because we can't overload our speaker beyond the point.
I will just telescope my questions for discussions, lengthy discussion afterwards. I think you're talking about the party is over from the point of view the Chinese economy is export based. Imagine a situation where actually it goes from export to investment, and then it goes on to basically an economic colonization kind of a model, where the resources, people, resource based, everything is outside. How will that model come to be impacted by the demographic problems? And in that process, India also, I think we are learning. We may not have learned that fast, but India has been an economic colonizer in the past. Will it not become a colonizer in future? Second thing, the war in 2025, is it going to be on land? Because I think the territories are going to be irrelevant with the technology. What will be the issue in that war in 2025? Thank you.
Last question there. Jan Saab, okay, over there first.
What I have observed
Short question.
by my reading Chinese scholars is that they are very much focusing on the main reasons behind US preeminence, and they have found that it is basically their immigration policy. And I think Chinese are also going in that direction. And the model they are trying to, because they always go for their own history, Tang Dynasty. Tang Dynasty was very cosmopolitan. All the bright minds were invited to the Tang Emperor's court. So I think they are trying to replicate that model. Maybe it's early stages, but that is thinking on those lines. Thank you.
Okay.
Sir, my question is in two parts. First is that the transparency of data in China, by nature, it's very difficult to get into it, because they got a self-auditing, they have a sense of keeping the entire information about them. Are we clear about that at this stage, sir? In 2001, I had gone to Washington, so we had gone to the Pentagon. I asked a question to an American journal. 2001, I told them that all the stores are flooded with Chinese stuff there, and cheaper and big number. Does it scare you? Very beautiful thing he said. He said chappals and umbrellas don't make economy. He says we got high technology with us, and they are not going to go very far on this. Is this statement true once we look back from there?
Okay. First question was Trump and Clinton. Now you see, there's declaratory politics. No, ना खाऊंगा, ना खिलाऊंगा, ना अच्छे दिन आएंगे, 15 lakhs to every bank account, all that is declaratory politics. So you're feeding, pandering to sundry appetites of the citizen consumer. Some fellow wants. So you promise everything. Government is very limiting. What you can do in government is extremely limited. So, God forbid if Trump becomes president, he will say, these are things I can't do. It takes time. Obama said, I will get out of Guantanamo in first 12 hours. 8 years down, he's still in Guantanamo. So, everybody says this, you have to get into office. So don't take declaratory politics very seriously. You let it pass. And we, particularly coming from India, which is only hot air in politics, we should take all this in with a pinch of salt. Ki hoga ya nahi hoga. Now, Clinton is not saying, Clinton is also pandering to her consumers. And will say things, but in the end, we all realize that you can't suddenly starve Americans of cheap goods. You can make the transition. You can't suddenly say, I'm going to close the tap. And how are you going to close the tap? You close the tap for iPads, iPhones. What's going to happen? ASEAN is going to get hurt. It's not so easy So it's going to be a slow process, which also means that you stop being profligate. You stop printing dollars. United States, incidentally, has 5 printing presses.
Fed presses.
Federal Bank of Philadelphia, Federal Bank of New York, Federal Bank of Chicago, Washington, various places. 5 banks churning out. So they can, and then there is, dollars are printed in Karachi and in Pyongyang, so there's more dollars also. So dollar printing is not going to stop so easily. It's very difficult. Start slowly to start. So that's why Obama has said that by 2020, current account deficit will bring it to a manageable level, which is happening, as I showed you in that graph, that blue base moving upwards. So don't take this too seriously. United States and China are highly engaged with each other. And there are many people in India who think the United States will go to war with China because of you, then you're sadly mistaken. The Americans will say, no, this is destabilizing 2 nuclear powers. Security Council will say, stop immediately. Meantime, the skirmishes would have taken place. So don't bank on the Americans for anything because they're too interlinked. American 3.5 trillion Chinese dollars are sitting in American banks. Americans are paying them 0 interest. And that money is invested in American markets, American goods, American consumption. So highly interlinked economies. They are like this cartoon of 2 Siamese twins, One is wearing a different hat, one is wearing a different hat. Both are fighting with each other, but they're joined in the stomach. America and China are like that, so don't expect America to do anything beyond a point. Export, sorry sir, there are no export-led model with it. You have consumption-led models or you have investment-led models. Chinese have an investment-led model. They make investment, they don't look at haven't been computing consumption. Matter of fact, they compute GDP very differently. They compute GDP on the basis of investment made. We compute GDP on the consumption, not on the investment made. If you compute GDP the way Chinese do, then our GDP will go up by 2%. So the Chinese method of calculation is very different. But there is only one model which is growth led. Whether you sell abroad or sell within is important. If your growth is coming from foreign countries, is even better. But the problem with China today is the Chinese middle class is not spending more money anymore. The government has given pump priming of the economy, making money available. They're not using it. They're not buying goods because they've all become insecure. You reach that age level, the consumption also starts dropping. You can't force people to consume. So they're passing through a very difficult passage now. Consumption is not going to go up the way they would like it to go. If Chinese domestic consumption went up, then you have to get money for that. Bring back your reserves, start putting it back in China, do it in driblets. It's going to take time. But then people are aging, they stop consuming. So there are all kinds of other issues. It's not straight lines. It's all getting very, very complex now. So it's not going to be easy at all for them to get out of this. The point is that every prediction in the world has shown Chinese growth rate coming down from now to 2050 and getting below. And that you cannot buck. We are just transiting 30 years behind. We will also go through that road. We will also start. So if we don't make use of our window of opportunity now to become richer, we are not going to get rich again. If you want to see the future, you should go to Egypt. With country, vast big country with enormous potential, everything, nothing happening. So this is our opportunity. Modi spoke of destiny. Are we going to seize our destiny? We've got to do it now. If you don't do it now, don't get serious. And don't step up capital expenditure and your budget, so you're not going to reach that destiny. You're going to, you can, if you have 100 rupees, you can either spend it or smoking cigarettes or buying milk for your children. The choice is yours, and we make the smoking habit always. We don't buy the milk habit. So we're making those. So today in our budget, only 9% of our budget is on capital expenditure. So look at this amazing thing that for 100 rupees we spend, only 9 rupees is spent on building something. So 91 rupees is spent on everybody, waving the sticks and saying, you do this, do that. Structure of public, Prime Minister is saying, Swachh Bharat, pick up the garbage. Garbage is not being picked up. Why? There's no government. Out of 23 million people in government, local government only hires 3 million people in the country. The rest are in state government and central government. All people tend to tell you what to do. So my competition, so every 6 guys who tell you what to do, there's only one guy who's there to do something for you. So this whole dancer is there, colonial edifice, to tell you what to do. So we go to restructure. The Chinese have done the restructuring of government. You look at their wage bill. In 1952, 70% of the wages was incurred paid for by the government in Beijing. Today, Beijing spends only 30%. 70% is spent in the provinces as wages. In India, it's 45 central, 45 state governments, and 10% local governments. So at the level at which you want Jhaduwala and this and that, and then your Jhaduwala is now on pay commission. He's getting 50,000 rupees. So he's wearing jeans and sneakers, he's not going to sweep. Now, the police constable, most of the police constables, the starting pay with all perks is 60,000 rupees. Now, what are the skills you need for that? Beyond, running 2 kilometers and then, paying off Mr. Chautala and getting a job. So, and you're paying for services much more than the market price. Why do you have CISF guards in metros and airports? Can't you get a 12,000 rupee guard? Your local chowkidar is getting 15,000 rupees, 12,000 rupees. What is he doing more? So, we've got skewed completely. In China, you won't find CISF trained guard, he's trained to fire a machine gun, throw grenades, fire mortars and all at an airport duty. You'll find a guy who's a chowkidar who's a chowkidar. And you'll find a PLA or a police guard sitting somewhere else, one guy. So you got to allocate duties also properly. And I think there's a lot to learn from China. It's not that, there's nothing to learn from China. Hell of a lot to learn from China. But were you there when the youth delegation went to China? Manisha Karaya had a big meeting. They sent 100 youth leaders to China. So before that they asked me to brief them. I said, please don't go to the hotels, and because in the hotels it's full of people who will solicit your custom. And don't come with that as an image. Go and see how they build roads. Go and see how they build hospitals. Go and see how they conduct local government. See how the streets are clean. See how the metros are running. And these are things we have to learn from them. And there's much to learn from China. And they've used their opportunity effectively. Which is why I will come to the transparency of data thing. In China, they have a saying that all data is like milk with some water added to it. So, even if you take out some water, even we do it, sir. I was in the finance ministry, I know how much of watering that goes on. Just before every election, our GDP goes up. You see this trend for the last 30 years. Chunav aa raha hai, GDP is up. Inflation is down. Because that is pushed on to next year. So we all play around with figures. Other day, Prime Minister said that after he's become Prime Minister, he's created 32 million jobs. 32 million. And we were at that conference in Bloomberg, so this small chit was sent, how do you explain 32 million jobs? So he says, under Mudra scheme, we have advanced 3.2 crore loans under Mudra scheme. Mudra scheme is 1,000 rupees, 1,200 rupee loans. So he says you assume every loan has created one job. So a loan of 1,000 rupees creates one job. is the sub you do. And you say I've created that. So we all do it. So you take it with salt, but still the main meal cost is still there. You can't go to China, look at it and see everything and deny it's not done well. This is a game which we like to play, but the fact is that they've done exceptionally well. They've seized every opportunity, they've used their resources well, they've rechanged their government, they retooled their system, they retooled the education system. The technical universities are on par with the best in America. Look at ours, except for a handful of IITs. Look at the level of skills in our colleges we're imparting. So I think, let's not look at China as a beautiful horse, There was this old Ukrainian proverb that if you show some people a beautiful horse, nice flanks and nice color, mane, always somebody will pick up the tail and say it smells a bit. Now, we Indians have got into this habit of saying China, there's something wrong there. It's not wrong, it's doing exceptionally well. And we have to learn from them. If we can't learn from them, at least don't jump on their toes till you're ready to jump on their toes. Lie low. And this constant talk, I go to War College, I go to all the defense establishments. This constant talk, we'll sort them out, we'll do this, we'll do that. Nobody's going to sort out anybody. Certainly, preparing a strike corps, sitting in Panagarh, is not going to sort out the Chinese. By the time you get acclimatized, it's going to be 6 weeks before you move up. And where are the grounds to hold your men? You need a strong Air Force and a strong Navy to take care of the first round of attack. Till the Sukhoi came, Indian Air Force didn't have trans-Himalayan capability also. When did the Sukhoi come? The Sukhoi also incidentally flew for 5 years without any hard points. He was very doing round and round, but couldn't carry any weapons on it. So I think, we need to get our act together. And if Allah lie low, you say that, Bade bhai, please come and give us some money. Take their investment. I always keep saying, get the Chinese to invest here. Lock them up in investments here.
But then how does 2025 happen? Why do you say that?
Because we are making mistakes. Because we are not learning. They are not investing. We are on collision course all the time. Now if you have the Uyghur Congress, and you call those guys in here, have the Initiatives for China conference here, then go the full course and say, I care and root for you and I'll prepare for it. Don't be, it's not a question of willing to bite, you're even afraid to bark.
What was the
What
water?
was the question
Sorry,
about-
sir. Sir,
I'm not saying, I said that we are in our most vulnerable period till 2025. All I'm saying is, I'm not saying the conflict is going to happen. If you,
I just wanted to know what would be the issues in the war. This will be on what?
issue could be,
Who's going to tell you?
issue could be anything.
How does it know?
You could have one forward post and you say take it out, or you could have a standoff with Chumar, you take it off. You didn't take it off.
All right, I understand what you were saying, sir.
Triggers can be anything.
Triggers can be anything.
You can have a war.
I think we are collapsing into a general conversation, which is always very good. But let me go through the formality of thanking the speaker. Mohan, you provided a vast amount of material for thinking. You have painted on a very, very large canvas. If I had one little regret, you mentioned that we have to get our act together. I mean, at the end of the day, and that question came from the young lady there, what does all this mean for India? That really is the gut issue in any discussion of this kind. You spoke of India's window of opportunity, demography. And I am a great believer in demography. Demography is, to a very large extent, destiny. We have an opportunity, but it seems that we are blissful in the process of squandering this opportunity. The so-called demography dividend, that is when your working age population continues to grow, your dependence or your ratio of dependency remains small and in fact gets smaller, that is the time to make hay. That is the time to move forward, as China did between 1990 and 2012. They were ready for it because they had a mechanism for people to be skilled. We are talking today of skilling. We have missions, we have high-level committees, we have a ministry of skill development, etc. But on the ground, the skilling process is extremely fragile. I think you would agree with that. And until that happens, we are not beginning to get our act together. You know, this is the kind of topic that can stretch over an entire series of discussions. But you launched us well in this discussion at the close of our pre-summer cycle, and we will resume in July with these Wednesday seminars, and surely we will come back to this in one form or another. Alka, if you permit, we should have a second round of this kind of a discussion as distinct from very technical discussions that we also have, which also have their special place. The ICS website is pretty rich and it's getting better. We have a Google group. Those who are not members are more than welcome to join. It's a very simple procedure. And we also have an ICS blog, which is a WordPress blog. It's not on our website, but it's connected with it. And our blog is also moving forward. So with this, I want to thank all of you for attending, and above all, thank Mohan Guruswamy for a very stimulating, a very, I would say, brilliant presentation that looks at the big picture and draws big conclusions from it. Thank you very much, sir.
You have your